Creepy, intense, and downright terrifying in battle, Tomura Shigaraki is the man who has brought the world of My Hero Academia to the brink of ruin. While it's easy to dismiss him as simply a puppet of All For One, Tomura remains his own person. He might bear the older villain's name, but as Kai Chisaki will tell you, Shigaraki is not an easy man to control. While he currently is trapped within his own mind, the final arc of My Hero Academia continues to revolve around the war Shigaraki started. His beliefs and thoughts are still looming over the cast. In this video, we'll be going in-depth on the Master of Disaster, looking at what drove him to this point and what the final arc of My Hero might hold for him. Just what fate awaits Shigaraki after the war? Let's get to it. Part 1. A Struggle for Self-Definition. Many fans have called Shigaraki a victim of childhood trauma. There are more than enough incidents in his background to justify the idea. There's the abuse he suffered at his father's hands, his accidental killing of his parents, and the years of trainings with All For One. But when we first encounter Shigaraki during the USJ incident, he's not obviously suffering. He comes across as relaxed, even enjoying himself. The assault was his plan, and even when meeting opposition, he's seeing little to worry about. He's willing to taunt a pro-hero, fully aware that a much larger response force is on its way. It's after the loss of the Nomu to All Might that we first see Shigaraki's ego crack. He can handle opposition and setbacks, but outright failure hits him hard. He's confident in himself, but when situations get outside of his control, he doesn't have a good way of dealing with it. This pattern continues in subsequent arcs, most notably in his petty jealousy of Stain. We see his depressive funk after the USJ incident and quiet frustration after Chisaki's killing of Magna. He either seethes with anger or just broods. After all, what does he have beyond his mission? His desire to hurt All Might or the world as a whole? This is how All For One hurt Tenko Shimura. Not through pain or open mistreatment, but by treating him purely as a tool. Keeping him focused on his mission has robbed him of a wider perspective and the ability to simply enjoy life. He's not oblivious to the ordinary world. We've seen him make game comparisons, even to the point of a full visualization sequence. But we've never seen him play. Tomura, especially early on, is a bundle of nerves and depression. His mission constrains him just like his trademark hands do. He's simply not good at calming himself or thinking about anything else. The arrival of the League is the start of Shigaraki's real development. It's hard to tell how much he feels a genuine attachment to his new friends and how much he views them as simple tools. They're initially the replacement for the goons lost in his first big scheme. But the League endures through setback after setback. Even after they lose All For One, they stick together. They develop a sense of kinship over time. They avenge Magna. They pull through the MLA attack. By the time of the war, they're generals, sharing sushi together in victory. It's easy to read Tomura as caring about his found family. He certainly seems to enjoy being their leader. Magna's death gets to him, and he's the one who suggests they share sushi following the MLA battle. We love to see the villains as nakama of their own, and some relationships have been undoubtedly strong, most notably Tomura and Twice. However, we've got no direct insight into Shigaraki's thoughts on the League. He's always remained focused on his goal beyond personal attachments. His more openly friendly moments towards the other League members might just be trying to keep useful tools in line. That's certainly how All For One seems to treat them after gaining control of Tomura's body. But Shigaraki may legitimately care. With the war in full swing, the League are putting themselves at risk to realize Tomura's dream. That opens up so many questions about the man they fight for. How far has Tomura come? Does he consider the other League members his friends? There's no firm answer to this yet, but we've seen All For One casually dismiss leaving members of the League behind. It's easy to imagine Tomura seething at this and fighting back as best he can within his own mind. Could this lead to a break between the two main villains of My Hero? Well, before we get further into trying to unpack everyone's favorite handyman, remember to make sure you're subscribed, have notifications on, and hit the like button for your regular dose of plot armor. Now, on with the video. Part 2. Two Roads. Throughout the story, Shigaraki has been Deku's counterpart. The two grow together, going from two little boys crying about an unfair world to the leaders of a generation of heroes and villains. The parallels were less blatant early on in the story when Shigaraki was more of a mysterious outsider. Now, though, they have the quirks of All Might and All For One. It gets much more obvious looking back at how similar their paths have always been. There's a reason villain Deku AUs are so popular in the fandom. While their families are all too different, there's fundamental resonance between young Deku and Tenko Shimura. Both were unhappy with the world. Both had no immediate way to control it. Midoriya couldn't suddenly develop a quirk any more than Tenko could overcome his father's hatred. As heavily as their arcs diverge, they start at the same point, a child crying over things they can't change. The divergence between them goes beyond morality, however. It's in how they were trained, and their very relationships with their mentors. While both All Might and All for One care for their successors, the two have very different teaching styles. Toshinori personally trained Deku right from the start, keeping a close eye on him and was always happy to directly help his protege. All for One, however, took far more of a backseat with Shigaraki. He provided him with funding, a headquarters, and the assistance of Kurogiri. He kept a close eye on him, but he largely left Tamura free to make his own decisions early on. The assault on the USJ was Tamura's plan, as was the attack on the camp and attempt to recruit Bakugo. These were not wise moves for the League of Villains. They alerted the pro-heroes to their existence, accomplished nothing, and left All for One himself imprisoned in Tartarus. But that wasn't the point as far as the master villain was concerned. He wanted Tamura to be a true successor, his own man with his own strength. If he wanted to encourage independence, he needed to have his disciple free to choose and find his own path. He let Tamura make his own mistakes, only stepping in to bail him out when there was no other option left. Ultimately, that approach paid off. Shigaraki developed over time. His plans got better, he recruited a more elite group of teammates, and refined his ideology. He took up the mantle of the Meta Liberation Army leader, and emerged from the Villain Academia arc as a force of his own. He would not be such an intimidating villain if he was simply a pawn of his predecessor, mindlessly obeying orders and following past directives. And yet, in the end, All for One took his liberty away from him. By the time of the war arc, the two mentors have each ended up adopting the other's approach. All Might has stepped back following the loss of his remaining power. As much as it hurts him to no longer be the bearer of One for All, he knows that it's Deku's time now. He'll do all he can to help, but doesn't lecture or order Deku. Toshinori lets his successor do things his own way, pushing One for All to its limits in ways he simply couldn't. All for One, however, has only gotten more involved. Shigaraki may have set this war in motion, but it's clear that his mentor is now fully in control. Even if he truly cares for Tamura, truly wants him to succeed, it will be by following All for One's methods and rules or not at all. He's lost faith in Tamura by this point. Then again, Tamura may lack that faith in himself. Even before his suppression, he had begun to rely more and more upon his mentor's resources. He needed Gigantomachia, he wanted Garaki's expertise, and he chose to take up All for One. Did he have other options? That's open to debate. The Meta Liberation Army was a hard threat for the League to counter, but he's been seeking these opportunities out. All for One's control over his disciple is a culmination, not a surprise. Deku and his arc focus on freedom from limitation. He goes beyond what's believed to be possible. He's gone from a quirkless boy whose dreams were laughed at to All Might's inheritor set to surpass him. Shigaraki's arc has ended up taking him from a rebel, freed from any restriction whatsoever, to a prisoner within his own body. His history as Tenko Shimura and his tutelage from All for One are both holding him back. Part 3. Standing Alone. It's interesting to look at Shigaraki in the context of Weekly Shonen Jump. His appearance and even power set call to mind other recent villains, Mahito of Jujutsu Kaisen and Muzan Kibutsuji of Demon Slayer both being prime examples. Tamura's focus on his own interests and desires, plus his dismissive and cynical approach to the wider world, also lines up neatly with these modern shonen antagonists. But Mahito and Muzan lack anything akin to the story of Tenko Shimura. These are purely antagonistic villains, one an inhuman spirit born of humanity's hatred for their fellow man, and the latter is solely responsible for every demon and demon slayer. The writers ensure that we hate these people, and from an early point are rooting for their destruction. While Horikoshi absolutely sets us up to hate and fear Shigaraki, the later revelation of his origins presents something of a curveball. He's an adult now, with culpability, but he was made that way by the actions of others, most notably another prominent villain. Straying from Jump, Shigaraki is extremely similar to the villain of Psycho Pass's first season, Shogo Makishima, both in aesthetic and narrative role. Makishima also sought to end a system that he had felt wronged him, and wanted others to live true to themselves regardless of consequences. However, Psycho Pass absolutely does not intend us to sympathize with Makishima. While the anime raises questions about its world, Shogo's actions are still shown clearly as abhorrent. The infamous sewer scene has him kill a close friend of protagonist Akane Surumuri simply to prove a point. While it has been teased many times, Horikoshi notably averted having any such shoot-the-dog moment with Shigaraki. The closest instance to it, his conversation with Deku in a packed mall, resolves with nothing more than a threat and a laugh at the hero's expense. But there's no one act we've seen from Shigaraki that would make the audience root for his destruction. There's nothing akin to Chisaki's torment of Eri or Garaki's transformation of Shirakumo into Kurogiri. But his hands aren't clean enough to make redemption smooth, even if he decides to change. Shigaraki has done a lot to hurt the heroes. For one, he's given Aizawa wounds he'll never recover from. His awakening killed a large number of pro-heroes and civilians. And the war has seen mass injury and death, with the loss of Midnight being particularly hard for Class 1A. Most of these lack the clear, visceral shoot-the-dog effect, however. They're indirect harm, part of a war or life-and-death combat. Early on, these served more to make Shigaraki intimidating rather than to set up a desire for vengeance. It left things fascinatingly unclear. Deku himself feels conflicted on the point, viewing Shigaraki's actions as unforgivable, but claiming nonetheless that he is in need of saving. While there are few modern examples of sympathetic villains who remain antagonists throughout the story, there are stronger cases further back in Jump's history. Sympathetic villains have been some of Jump's best remembered antagonists, such as Itachi in Pain in Naruto or Chimera Ant King Muriam from Hunter x Hunter. They couple interesting, compelling motivations with the strength and determination to remain intimidating threats to the heroes. Shigaraki may have the potential to go down in shonen history as a similarly compelling villain. He's not quite solidified that standing yet, but we still have the final arc to go. Part 4. Tenko. Say hello to Tenko, the Battle Vandal. He's the protagonist of a one-shot by Kohei Horikoshi, published in Akamaru Jump back in 2007. In it, we meet the titular Tenko, a wild boy whose hands disintegrate whatever they touch, and annoys samurai by destroying their swords. There's obvious comparisons to Tamura. Tenko not only has the same power, name, and a very similar design, but his life story is close. The abuse of his father and loss of his family happened in a similar manner, leading the young boy to a similar objective, trying to destroy the aspect of the world that hurt him. In his case, by disintegrating swords and armor, he thinks that without them, someone can no longer be a warrior. While Tamura is clearly an adult, his thinking is as childish and simple as Tenko's, a point that's even more apparent in the one-shot. Tenko speaks in short sentences, gets physical when angered, and is utterly convinced of his logic. Even when people stare daggers at him, he's smiling, convinced that he's made them no longer violent. There's a lot of early Goku in him, all the power to change the world, but none of the knowledge or understanding. This Tenko, however, took a parallel path to Shigaraki. Thanks to Warrior Hana, he does start to mature. He sees some nuance beyond swords are bad, and it's the start of him maturing. While the one-shot ends with a little playful teasing, there's every sign Tenko and Hana will support and help each other through life. This is what Shigaraki needed. It's what All for One denied him. If you want to see what a hero Shigaraki AU might look like, the Tenko one-shot is a great example. It's likely Horikoshi worked backwards from this one-shot in developing Tamura's origin, taking what had been a hero story and twisting it. Hana goes from an older peasant woman who can provide support to his just as vulnerable sister. The reasons behind his father's abuse are explained, if not condoned. Most notably, his mother's final word are omitted. She dies before giving her son Tamura the guidance he needed, leaving All for One free to step into that void. Horikoshi reworked a hero's origin into a villain's with just a handful of tweaks, which makes this line from his Akamaru Jump debut page fascinating. I hope that the main character will remain in the hearts of everyone who reads it. Part 5. A Crying Little Boy. Entering My Hero's final arc, a lot of people are wondering about Shigaraki. Horikoshi has reinforced the idea of the villain having some kind of redemptive moment, with Deku wanting to rescue him and Tenko Shimura hoping for Midoriya to somehow save him. Could he pull it off? There's every chance he can't. Deku will try his hardest, but things have been going from bad to worse. Perhaps the best he'll manage will be one brief moment of uncertainty from Shigaraki. If Deku's words bring back memories of Tenko's trauma and fear, it could be enough to turn the tide of battle. Putting his opponent to rest would grant that inner child peace. You could call death a very dark form of saving him. But that's not what Deku wants. As unforgivable as Shigaraki's actions have been, Izuku is far too noble and idealistic to think killing is merciful. He'll make some legitimate effort to talk Shigaraki down, and narratively, it's not out of the question. All For One has largely co-opted the war effort at this point. Tamura is more his weapon, a monster he created and unleashed against the world, and he wouldn't be the first to turn on his master. Perhaps Tamura will refuse all the same. Perhaps this is a man Deku simply couldn't save. But if the war has gotten bleak enough, if All For One has sacrificed too much, Tamura might call a truce with Deku to try and preserve his subordinates' lives. Shigaraki will be angry and frustrated if events force him to resort to that. Surrender would be an admission of defeat from the man desperate to burn the world to the ground. But Tamura's arc in My Hero Academia has been one of finding himself, of trying to define what to do with his life and power. Abandoning his original goal would be the culmination of that arc, and All For One's deepest failure. It wouldn't be enough to provide a happy ending at this point. Most likely Shigaraki would die from trying to restrain the All For One intelligence possessing him. At best, he might survive to be imprisoned by the heroes. Still, Shigaraki appreciates his victories. Even if Tamura ends up dying in the final arc, or rotting away in Tartarus, having spat in the eye of his mentor and saved his found family may give him some comfort in the end. However, there is still a faint chance for a truly happy ending for Shigaraki. If he manages to throw off All For One's control, find a more positive outlook on life, and evade the law, that result would be fascinating. Tamura still has his reasons to be skeptical of the world, but if convinced to change his ways some, a fugitive Shigaraki could ultimately prove a positive force. Instead of All For One, the shadowy tyrant making people dance with their puppet strings, he could help those the system fails. Ironically, this Shigaraki could end up in a similar philosophical place to Stain. He'd be a voice of skepticism toward pro-hero society, helping people who mainstream pros can't or won't. He could be a hero, an unorthodox, scary vigilante, but a hero who inspires hope and helps those who need it. Izuku might even assist him. After all, My Hero Academia is a story about how Deku became the greatest hero. Simply punching the villain out does not make him particularly great. There has to be more to the final confrontation for him than simply defeating All For One. Saving Shigaraki, a feat that previous One For All wielders felt was near impossible, would be the mark of a truly great hero. But hey, maybe that's just a pipe dream. What do you think will happen to Tamura? Leave a comment down below. My name's Alexandra Macedo. Thank you for watching Plot Armor. Have an awesome day.